The scent of bleach burned my nostrils as I scrubbed the bathroom floor, my knees aching against the cold tiles. 4 hours into my shift at the Imperial Hotel, and my back already felt like it might snap in two. But I couldn't stop. Not when rent was due in 3 days, and my bank account held barely enough for a week's worth of groceries. Ellie, Mr. Moretti wants his suite prepared. Now. Sandra, the head housekeeper, barked from the doorway, her thin lips pressed into a disapproving line. I nodded, swallowing the sigh that threatened to escape. I'll finish this first and... No. The Moretti suite takes priority over everything. It needs to be perfect before he arrives. Her voice dropped to a whisper. Do you understand? Perfect. The way she emphasized the word sent a chill down my spine. I'd worked at the Imperial for 8 months, yet I'd never heard of any Mr. Moretti. But judging by Sandra's rigid posture and the beads of sweat forming at her temples, he was clearly someone important. I gathered my cleaning supplies with trembling hands and made my way to the penthouse floor. The elevator ride felt eternal. My reflection in the polished doors showing a pale, tired woman with dark circles under her green eyes. At 28, I looked closer to 40, worn down by years of disappointment and struggle. 3 years ago, my ex-husband Mark had left me, claiming I was defective for not being able to give him children. We'd tried for 5 years, endured countless fertility treatments, only for him to announce one day that he'd found someone else, someone who was already carrying his child. The whispers followed me in our small town. The pitying looks and hushed comments about how I was less of a woman for being barren. So I'd fled to the city, hoping to disappear among millions of strangers, taking whatever jobs I could find. The Imperial was the most stable employment I'd had since leaving, even if it meant cleaning up after the obscenely wealthy who never bothered to look me in the eye. The elevator doors slid open, revealing a private foyer with marble floors so shiny I could see my reflection. The penthouse suite occupied the entire top floor, and I'd never been assigned to clean it before. My heart hammered in my chest as I inserted the master keycard. What kind of person warranted such special treatment? The suite was immaculate, all sleek lines, floor-to-ceiling windows, and furniture that probably cost more than I'd make in 5 years. The air smelled of expensive leather and subtle cologne, a masculine scent that made my pulse quicken inexplicably. I forced myself to focus on my task, methodically checking each room to ensure everything was perfect. In the master bedroom, I changed the sheets with practiced efficiency, smoothing the Egyptian cotton over the massive bed. My fingers brushed against something hard beneath the pillow. Curiosity got the better of me, and I lifted the silk pillowcase. A gun. Black, sleek, and terrifying. I dropped the pillow as if it had burned me, backing away so quickly I slammed into the bedside table, sending a crystal tumbler crashing to the floor. The sound echoed through the silent suite like a gunshot. Shit, 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 I whispered, dropping to my knees to collect the shattered pieces. A sharp edge sliced into my palm, and I bit my lip to keep from crying out as blood welled from the cut. You're not the regular housekeeper. The deep voice froze me in place. Slowly, I raised my head to find a man standing in the doorway, his broad shoulders blocking the exit. He wasn't what I expected. No flashy suit or gold jewelry that screamed mobster. Instead, he wore a simple black button-down and tailored pants. His dark hair slicked back from a face that belonged on a Renaissance sculpture. But it was his eyes that paralyzed me. Obsidian dark, calculating, and completely devoid of warmth. Behind him stood another man, taller and broader, his expression blank as he surveyed the room with practiced precision. "I'm so sorry, sir," I stammered, clutching my bleeding hand. I accidentally... I'll clean this up immediately." He didn't move, just watched me with those unnerving eyes. "You're bleeding." It wasn't a question, but I nodded anyway, feeling like prey being assessed by a predator. "It's nothing. I'll just..." He crossed the room in 3 long strides, towering over me as I knelt among the broken glass. I flinched when he extended his hand, expecting, I don't know what I expected, not the pristine handkerchief he offered, monogrammed with the initials AM. "Clean yourself up," he said, his voice like gravel wrapped in velvet. "Antonio, get the first aid kit." The larger man disappeared without a word, and I awkwardly pressed the handkerchief to my palm, horrified to see blood seeping into the expensive fabric. "I'm so sorry about your handkerchief, sir. And the glass. I'll replace it, I promise." A sound escaped him, not quite a laugh, more like a controlled exhale. "The glass costs more than you make in a month." Heat flooded my cheeks at the casual reminder of my place. "Then I'll work it off. Extra shifts or... What's your name?" he interrupted, crouching down to my level. This close, I could see flecks of amber in his dark eyes, smell the subtle cologne that permeated the suite. It made my head swim. "Eleanor," I whispered. "Eleanor Wells." "Eleanor," he repeated, as if tasting my name. "You can call me Alessio." Something about the way he said it made me think that was a privilege rarely granted. I nodded, not trusting my voice. Antonio returned with a sleek first aid kit, handing it to Alessio before resuming his position by the door. With surprising gentleness, Alessio took my injured hand, removing the bloody handkerchief and examining the cut. "Not deep enough for stitches," he murmured, more to himself than to me. He cleaned the wound with an antiseptic wipe that stung enough to make my eyes water, then wrapped a bandage around my palm with practiced efficiency. "Thank you," I said when he finished, pulling my hand back perhaps too quickly. His touch unsettled me, sending contradictory signals of danger and safety that I couldn't reconcile. "You're new." Again, not a question. "I've worked here 8 months, sir, but not in my suite." I shook my head. "No, sir. Sandra, the head housekeeper, she assigned me today because..." "Because?" he prompted when I trailed off. I hesitated, then decided honesty was safer than lies. "Because she said it needed to be perfect for your arrival, and I'm thorough." Something like amusement flickered across his face. "And how's that working out?" My gaze fell to the broken glass still scattered across the floor, and I felt my shoulders slump. "Not well, sir." To my surprise, he stood and offered his hand to help me up. I took it hesitantly, hyper-aware of his strength as he effortlessly pulled me to my feet. For a moment we stood too close, his dark eyes studying my face with an intensity that made me want to hide and step closer all at once. "Clean this up," he finally said, releasing my hand and stepping back. "Then you're dismissed for the day. But my shift doesn't end until..." I wasn't asking, Eleanor. His tone left no room for argument. I nodded quickly. "Yes, sir. Thank you." He turned to leave, then paused. "And Eleanor? Tomorrow you'll be assigned permanently to my suite for the duration of my stay." My heart stuttered. Is that a problem?" The edge in his voice made it clear what my answer should be. "No, sir. No problem at all." With a slight nod, he and Antonio left the room, leaving me trembling with a mix of relief and dread. As I carefully collected the broken glass, I couldn't shake the feeling that I'd just been caught in a trap of my own making. The next morning, I woke to the now familiar nausea that had plagued me for weeks. I barely made it to the bathroom before emptying my stomach, clinging to the toilet as dizziness washed over me in waves. When it finally passed, I sat on the cold tile floor, arms wrapped around my middle, trying to catch my breath. Stress, I told myself. Just stress and too many late nights picking up extra shifts. I couldn't afford to be sick. Not with rent due and a new responsibility cleaning Mr. Moretti's suite. Alessio Moretti. I'd looked him up after my shift yesterday, finding only vague mentions of a reclusive businessman with interests in real estate, luxury hotels, and import-export. Nothing that explained the gun under his pillow, or the way staff at the Imperial whispered his name like a prayer or a curse. I dragged myself to the shower, letting hot water wash away the lingering sickness. As I dressed in my uniform, a plain black dress with the Imperial's logo embroidered on the breast pocket, I noticed with dismay that it felt tighter across my abdomen. Another thing to worry about. I couldn't afford new clothes if I was gaining weight. The Imperial loomed ahead as I hurried down the street, its gleaming facade a monument to wealth and privilege. I slipped through the staff entrance, hoping to avoid Sandra's scrutinizing gaze, but she intercepted me in the hallway. "You're assigned exclusively to the Moretti suite until further notice," she said without preamble, thrusting a new keycard into my hand. "This gives you access only to his floor. You report directly to Mr. Moretti or his staff. I don't want to hear a single complaint. Understood? I nodded, clutching the keycard. What about my other duties? Reassigned. Her thin lips curved into something resembling a smile, though it didn't reach her eyes. Apparently, Mr. Moretti requested you specifically. Can't imagine why. The implication in her tone made my cheeks burn. It's not like that, I protested weakly. I just cleaned his suite yesterday. And broke a baccarat crystal tumbler worth $3,000, she snapped. Yet instead of firing you, he asks for you personally. Make of that what you will. She stalked away, leaving me stunned. $3,000 for a drinking glass. The absurdity of such wealth made my head spin. Or maybe that was the lingering nausea. The private elevator to the penthouse required both the keycard and a fingerprint scan. As I ascended, my reflection in the mirrored walls looked even more haggard than yesterday. I pinched my cheeks to bring some color to my pale face and smoothed down my unruly auburn hair, suddenly self-conscious about my appearance. The doors opened directly into the suite's foyer. I stepped out cautiously, listening for any sign of occupancy. Mr. Moretti? I called softly. When no answer came, I ventured further into the suite, relieved to find it empty. I worked methodically through each room, dusting, vacuuming, and straightening with extra care. In the master bedroom, I approached the bed with trepidation, remembering yesterday's discovery. This time, I didn't look under the pillow as I changed the sheets. In the ensuite bathroom, I found evidence of the suite's occupant. A wet towel, steam on the mirror, the lingering scent of expensive soap. I tried not to think about Alessio Moretti showering just feet from where I stood, as I wiped down marble countertops and polished chrome fixtures to a mirror shine. The last room I entered was his office. Unlike the rest of the suite, which was immaculate, the desk here was covered with papers and an open laptop. I hesitated, unsure if I should touch anything. Deciding it was safer not to disturb his work, I limited myself to dusting the bookshelves and vacuuming the plush carpet, careful to keep my eyes averted from the documents on his desk. As I was about to leave, a framed photograph caught my eye. It stood on a side table, partially hidden behind a stack of books. Without thinking, I picked it up, a black and white image of a young boy with a solemn expression, standing beside an older man with the same penetrating eyes as Alessio. Curious, Eleanor. The photograph nearly slipped from my grasp at the sound of his voice. I spun around to find Alessio leaning against the doorframe, watching me with those unreadable eyes. I'm sorry, I stammered, carefully replacing the frame exactly as I'd found it. I was just dusting and thought you'd take a look at my personal belongings. His tone was mild, but there was steel beneath it. No, I wouldn't. I didn't intend to pry. My heart pounded so hard I was sure he could hear it. The photograph caught my eye, that's all. He pushed away from the doorframe and moved toward me with the fluid grace of a predator. I forced myself to stand my ground, though every instinct screamed to back away. That's my father in me, he said, surprising me with the admission. He picked up the photograph, studying it with an expression I couldn't decipher. Taken a few months before he was murdered in front of me. The casual way he delivered such a horrific statement left me speechless. What does one say to that? I'm so sorry, I finally managed, the words woefully inadequate. His dark gaze shifted from the photograph to my face. Are you? You didn't know him. No, but no child should witness something like that. Something flickered in his eyes, surprise perhaps, before his expression smoothed back into impassivity. He replaced the photograph and moved to his desk, effectively dismissing me. I took the hint and headed for the door, eager to escape the sudden tension. Eleanor. I paused, turning back reluctantly. Yes, sir? Have dinner with me tonight. It wasn't a request, despite the phrasing. My mind raced, searching for a polite way to decline. I don't think that would be appropriate, Mr. Moretti. I'm staff and 7 o'clock. Wear something nice. He didn't look up from his laptop. Antonio will pick you up. How do you know where I live? The question slipped out before I could stop it. This time he did look up, a cold smile playing at the corners of his mouth. I know everything about the people who work for me, Eleanor. A chill ran down my spine. I don't work for you. I work for the Imperial. I own the Imperial. He stated it so matter-of-factly that I almost missed the implication. You... what? Among other things. He returned his attention to his laptop. 7 o'clock. Don't be late. I stood frozen, struggling to process this new information. The nausea I'd fought all morning returned with a vengeance, churning my stomach until I feared I might be sick right there on his expensive carpet. I need to go, I whispered, more to myself than to him, and fled the office before he could respond. I barely made it to the staff bathroom 2 floors down before retching violently into the toilet. Afterward, I sat on the floor, trembling and clammy, wondering what was happening to me, both physically and in the surreal situation with Alessio Moretti. As I washed my face with cold water, I caught my reflection in the mirror. The woman staring back looked frightened, confused, and utterly lost. What did a man like Alessio Moretti want with someone like me? More importantly, what would happen if I refused to find out? 7 o'clock came too quickly. I stood in front of my bedroom mirror, scrutinizing my appearance with growing despair. Wear something nice, he'd said, as if my closet held anything remotely suitable for dining with a man who casually mentioned $3,000 tumblers and murdered fathers. After tearing through every hanger twice, I'd settled on a forest green wrap dress I'd worn to a cousin's wedding 3 years ago. It was the only thing I owned that wasn't jeans, work uniforms, or threadbare lounge clothes. The dress hugged my curves more than I remembered, especially around my waist and chest. Had I gained that much weight in recent weeks? A sharp knock at my apartment door sent my heart racing. I grabbed my only pair of decent heels, black pumps with sensible 2-inch heels, and a small clutch purse before taking a deep, steadying breath. Antonio stood in the hallway, his imposing frame making my apartment entrance seem smaller. His eyes scanned me briefly, his expression revealing nothing. Ms. Wells, he said with a slight nod. The car is waiting. I locked my door with trembling fingers, acutely aware of how out of place this man looked in my run-down apartment building. The neighbors would talk. They always did when anything disrupted the building's dreary routine. Where are we going? I asked as we descended the stairs. Mr. Moretti has arranged dinner at La Serrata. My stomach dropped. La Serrata was the most exclusive restaurant in the city, the kind of place where celebrities were rumored to be turned away if they didn't have reservations weeks in advance. I'd walked past it once, glimpsing chandeliers and women dripping in diamonds through the windows. I'm not dressed for La Serrata, I said, panic rising in my throat. Antonio's expression didn't change. Mr. Moretti believes you are. Outside, a sleek black Bentley idled at the curb, drawing stares from passers-by. Antonio opened the rear door, and I slid onto buttery leather seats, sinking into luxury that made me painfully aware of my second-hand dress and scuffed shoes. The drive was silent and mercifully short. When we arrived, Antonio spoke quietly to the maitre d', who nodded deferentially and led us through the restaurant. I felt eyes on me as we passed tables of beautiful people in designer clothes, their curious gazes assessing and dismissing me in the same breath. We were shown to a private dining room, where Alessio Moretti stood gazing out a floor-to-ceiling window that overlooked the city lights. He turned as we entered, and my breath caught in my throat. In his penthouse suite, he'd been intimidating. Here, dressed in a perfectly tailored charcoal suit that emphasized his broad shoulders and narrow waist, he was devastating. Power radiated from him like heat from a flame, drawing me in despite the danger. Eleanor, he said, his dark eyes taking in every detail of my appearance. You look beautiful. The compliment, delivered with such conviction, caught me off guard. Thank you, I murmured, fighting the absurd urge to curtsy. Though I'm clearly underdressed for this place. A hint of a smile played at the corners of his mouth. You're exactly as you should be. Antonio withdrew silently, closing the door behind him. Alone with Alessio, the room suddenly felt too small, the air too heavy. Wine? He asked, moving to a side table where a bottle was already breathing. I nodded, desperate for something to calm my nerves. He poured 2 glasses of deep red wine, handing one to me with a grace that spoke of privilege and practice. Why am I here, Mr. Moretti? I asked, finding courage in the direct question. Alessio, he corrected, gesturing to a chair at the intimate table set for 2. And you're here because I wanted to apologize for startling you this morning. I sat, arranging my dress carefully. You could have sent flowers, or just not mentioned your father's murder so casually. The words slipped out before I could censor them, and I froze, horrified by my own bluntness. To my surprise, he laughed, a genuine sound that transformed his severe features, revealing a glimpse of a different man. Flowers are impersonal, he said, taking the seat across from me, and I find that speaking plainly saves time. Is that what we're doing? Speaking plainly? His dark eyes held mine. Would you prefer I lie to you, Eleanor? I'd prefer to understand what this is. I gestured between us. Why you requested me specifically for your suite. Why you're having dinner with the housekeeper who broke your expensive tumbler. Because you interest me. The simple statement hung in the air between us. Before I could respond, waiters entered with our first course. Delicate plates of something that looked more like art than food. I took the liberty of ordering, Alessio explained as the waiters departed. I hope you don't mind. Under normal circumstances, I might have bristled at the presumption. But nothing about this situation was normal, and the small acts of rebellion I might have clung to seemed pointless in the face of his quiet authority. I've never eaten at a place like this, I admitted, studying the intricate arrangement on my plate. Then I'm honored to be your first. The double entendre wasn't lost on me. Heat crept up my neck as I focused intently on my food, which was, admittedly, exquisite. We ate in silence for a few moments, a strange intimacy building in the quiet. Tell me about yourself, Eleanor, he finally said. I took a sip of wine to buy time. There's not much to tell. I grew up in a small town upstate, married young, divorced 5 years later, moved to the city for a fresh start. Now I clean hotel rooms. And my suite, specifically. I nodded, wondering if he could see through my deliberate omissions, the years of fertility treatments, the whispered mockery in my hometown, the crushing loneliness of my barren womb and empty apartment. You don't wear a ring, he observed, but there's a mark where one used to be. My hand instinctively covered the pale band of skin on my finger. The divorce was 3 years ago. I only recently stopped wearing it. Why keep it on so long after he left? The question was too personal, too piercing. Protection, I answered honestly, surprising myself. Men are less likely to bother a married woman. Something dangerous flashed in his eyes. Did men bother you, Eleanor? Not anymore. I held his gaze, refusing to look away despite the intensity I found there. The second course arrived, something with truffle and foam that probably cost more than my weekly grocery budget. As we ate, Alessio steered the conversation to safer topics. Books I'd read recently, my impressions of the city, places I'd traveled, few, versus places I wanted to go, many. He was an attentive listener, asking thoughtful questions that made me forget, momentarily, the strangeness of our situation. By the third course, the wine had loosened my tongue and eased the tension in my shoulders. What about you? I asked, as the waiter poured more wine into my nearly empty glass. All this talk about me, and I still know nothing about you except that you own the Imperial and have expensive taste in glassware. A hint of amusement crossed his features. What would you like to know? Everything, I thought. Why you have a gun under your pillow. Why your eyes hold such darkness. Why I'm really here. Where are you from? I asked instead. Originally? Sicily. But I've lived in America since I was 15. After your father, I trailed off, unsure how to delicately reference what he'd so bluntly stated earlier. After he was killed, yes. Alessio's expression hardened. My mother brought us here for a fresh start. Not unlike your own. I nodded, sensing the parallels he was drawing. And now you're a businessman. Something like irony flickered across his face. Among other things. What other things? He studied me for a long moment, as if deciding how much to reveal. I protect what's mine, Eleanor. That's what I do. The way he said it sent a shiver down my spine. Not entirely from fear. And what exactly is yours, Alessio? His smile was slow and predatory. More than most people realize, the fifth course, or was it the sixth, arrived, breaking the tension that had built between us. By the time dessert was served, an exquisite chocolate creation that melted on my tongue, I was feeling pleasantly warm from the wine, and surprisingly comfortable in his presence. "I should get home," I said reluctantly as the waiter cleared our plates. "I have the early shift tomorrow." "No, you don't," Alessio replied, signing the check without even glancing at the total. "Excuse me? Your schedule has been adjusted. You'll come to my suite at noon tomorrow." Indignation cut through the wine-induced haze. "You can't just rearrange my life without asking me. I already have." His tone was matter-of-fact, not unkind, but allowing no argument. "Antonio will take you home now. Get some rest. You look tired." The abrupt dismissal stung more than it should have. Right, because that's what every woman wants to hear at the end of a date, that she looks exhausted. His dark eyes met mine, intense and unreadable. "Is that what this was, Eleanor? A date?" Heat flooded my cheeks. "I don't know what this was. Neither do I," he admitted, surprising me with his candor, "but I'm interested in finding out." Before I could respond, he stood and offered his hand to help me up. I took it, hyper-aware of his strength as he gently pulled me to my feet. For a moment, we stood too close, his cologne enveloping me in warmth and spice. "Thank you for dinner," I said softly, reluctantly withdrawing my hand from his. "Thank you for coming," he replied, and I had the strangest feeling he meant it. Antonio appeared as if summoned by some silent signal, escorting me back through the restaurant and to the waiting car. The ride home passed in a blur, my mind replaying every moment of the evening, searching for clues to Alessio Moretti's true intentions. At my apartment door, Antonio handed me a small box, wrapped in simple black paper. "For Mr. Moretti," he said, then turned and left before I could respond. Inside my apartment, I carefully opened the package to find a replacement for my wedding ring. Not a diamond, but a delicate band of twisted gold, set with a small emerald that matched my dress exactly. A note in bold, masculine handwriting read, "A different kind of protection, A." I slipped it onto my right hand, where it fit perfectly. How had he known my size? The question added to the growing list of mysteries surrounding Alessio Moretti. As I prepared for bed, the nausea that had plagued me for weeks returned with a vengeance. I barely made it to the bathroom in time, retching until nothing remained but dry heaves and cold sweat. Afterward, I lay on the bathroom floor, too exhausted to move, my mind racing with unwelcome possibilities. The missed periods I'd attributed to stress. The nausea that came in waves, worst in the mornings. The tenderness in my breasts, the slight thickening of my waist. No, it wasn't possible. The doctors had been clear. My condition made pregnancy highly unlikely, if not impossible. That's why Mark had left, why the whispers followed me from my hometown. Barren, empty, defective. And yet, with trembling hands, I reached for my phone and checked the calendar. 10 weeks since my last period, 10 weeks since that night, the one I'd tried so hard to forget. Mark had shown up at my apartment, drunk and apologetic, claiming his new marriage was a mistake. I'd been lonely and weak, desperate to believe he'd realized what we had was worth saving. By morning, he was gone again, leaving nothing but a dent in my pillow and renewed shame in my heart. 10 weeks. I pulled myself up from the floor and stared at my reflection in the bathroom mirror. The woman looking back seemed different somehow, her eyes wider, her face softer despite the pallor. "It's not possible," I whispered to my reflection, but even as I said the words, a strange certainty settled in my bones, heavier than fear, more substantial than hope. I needed to know for sure. The pharmacy opened at 6 a.m. I was waiting outside the doors, having barely slept, my mind churning with possibilities and implications. The cashier didn't meet my eyes as she rang up the pregnancy test, and I was grateful for the small mercy. Back in my apartment, I followed the instructions with shaking hands, then sat on the edge of the bathtub, watching the seconds tick by on my phone. One line meant I was being paranoid, letting anxiety create phantom symptoms. 2 lines would rewrite everything I thought I knew about myself. When the timer beeped, I couldn't bring myself to look immediately. I closed my eyes, took a deep breath, and sent a silent prayer to a God I wasn't sure I still believed in. 2 lines. Clear and unmistakable. I sank to the floor, my legs suddenly unable to support me. A sound escaped my throat, not quite a laugh, not quite a sob. The test fell from my numb fingers as I wrapped my arms around my middle, around the impossible life growing there, a child. Mark's child. The one thing he'd left me for, now growing inside me all along. The irony was so bitter I could taste it, metallic and sharp on my tongue. The mockery and whispers, the pitying looks and cruel jokes about my barren womb, all while I carried the proof of my fertility unknowingly inside me. What would I tell him? Would I tell him at all? The thought of Mark's reaction, the shock, the possessive rage that had always simmered beneath his charming exterior, sent a chill through me. He'd want to control me again, to own me through our child. And what of my job? My meager savings wouldn't last long without income, and no one wanted to hire a visibly pregnant housekeeper. Alessio Moretti's face flashed in my mind. Those dark, penetrating eyes that seemed to see too much. What would he think if he knew? Would he still look at me with that mix of interest and intensity? Or would I become just another problem to be managed? An inconvenience in his ordered world? The ring he'd given me caught the light as I pushed myself up from the floor. A different kind of protection, he'd called it. But it couldn't protect me from this. From the reality reshaping my world with each passing second. I glanced at the clock, 10:30 a.m. In less than 2 hours, I was expected at Alessio's suite. I couldn't face him today, not with this revelation still reverberating through me like aftershocks from an earthquake. I called the hotel's staff line, forcing my voice into a semblance of normalcy as I explained that I was ill and couldn't come in. The supervisor sounded skeptical, but didn't argue. "I'll inform Mr. Moretti's staff," she said before hanging up. I crawled into bed, pulling the covers over my head as if I could hide from the truth, from the decisions that loomed before me. Sleep claimed me eventually, a fitful escape from consciousness. The pounding on my door jolted me awake. Disoriented, I squinted at the window. Darkness had fallen while I slept. The pounding came again, more insistent. "Eleanor!" A deep voice called through the door. "Open the door!" Alessio. I stumbled from bed, running a hand through my tangled hair as panic surged through me. Had the hotel called him when I didn't show up? Why would he come here himself? "Just a minute," I called, my voice hoarse from sleep. I glanced down at myself, wrinkled t-shirt, sweatpants, bare feet, and decided there was no point in trying to improve my appearance. Let him see me like this, without the armor of my uniform or the borrowed elegance of last night's dress. When I opened the door, Alessio stood there with Antonio a few paces behind him, both radiating tension. Alessio's eyes swept over me, cataloging details with alarming precision. "You're sick," he stated, though it sounded more like an accusation. "Yes," I replied, wrapping my arms around my middle in an unconsciously protective gesture. "Just a stomach bug. I'll be fine tomorrow." His dark gaze narrowed. "May I come in?" It wasn't really a question. I stepped aside, acutely aware of how small and shabby my apartment would appear to someone who lived in a penthouse suite. Antonio remained in the hallway as Alessio entered, closing the door behind him. "You didn't answer your phone," he said, his voice carefully controlled. I frowned, then remembered I'd turned it off before falling asleep. I was resting. He moved through my apartment with predatory grace, taking in the second-hand furniture, the faded curtains, the stack of paperback novels beside my bed, the only luxury I consistently allowed myself. "You should have called me directly," he said, turning back to face me. "Why would I do that?" I asked, genuine confusion momentarily overriding my anxiety. I called the staff line, like protocol dictates, because I was worried. The admission seemed to surprise him as much as it did me. We stood in silence, the air between us charged with unspoken questions. His eyes dropped to my right hand, where his ring still glittered. "You're wearing it," he observed, something like satisfaction in his tone. I touched the ring self-consciously. "It's beautiful. Thank you. But you still called in sick rather than come to me." A statement, not a question. "I didn't realize you were expecting a personal report on my health status," I said, more sharply than I intended. His expression hardened. "When someone who was fine last night suddenly can't come to work the next day, after I've made it clear she interests me, I tend to wonder if I'm being avoided. The accuracy of his assessment made me flush. It's not that simple. Then explain it to me. How could I? How could I tell this intimidating, powerful man that I was pregnant with another man's child, that in a few months I'd be a single mother, struggling even more than I already was? I really am sick, I said instead. Morning sickness. The words slipped out before I could stop them, hanging in the air between us like a live grenade with the pin pulled. Alessio went very still, his expression unreadable. Morning sickness. I nodded, unable to form words past the tightness in my throat. You're pregnant. It wasn't a question, but I nodded again anyway, tears welling in my eyes. I just found out this morning. Something flashed across his face, too quickly to identify, before his expression settled into careful neutrality. The father? My ex-husband, I whispered, shame burning through me. It was a mistake. One night, a couple of months ago. Does he know? I shook my head. No one knows. Just me, and now you. Alessio's jaw tightened, a muscle ticking in his cheek. What do you intend to do? I don't know yet, I admitted, sinking onto the edge of my sofa. I need time to think, to process. He remained standing, a dark pillar in my small living room. You'll need medical care, proper nutrition, a safer place to live. I blinked up at him, confused by the practical turn of the conversation. I can't afford to move, and my insurance through the hotel is basic at best. I'll take care of it. The simple declaration left me speechless for a moment. Why would you do that? He moved then, coming to sit beside me on the sofa, close enough that I could feel the heat radiating from his body. Because I want to. You barely know me. I know enough, he said, his voice dropping to that velvet-covered gravel tone that made my pulse quicken. I know you're alone. I know you work hard. I know you wear a dead marriage on your finger for protection rather than ask for help. His assessment was so accurate it stole my breath. That doesn't explain why you'd help me. Perhaps I have my reasons. His gaze dropped to my stomach, still flat beneath my t-shirt. How far along? About 10 weeks, I think. He nodded, as if confirming a calculation in his head. You'll move into one of my properties. I have a secure building not far from here. No rent, no questions. I can't accept that, I protested, though the offer was tempting. I can't be kept. You can accept help without being kept, Eleanor. His hand found mine, his thumb brushing over the emerald ring. Consider it an advance on future services. I pulled my hand away. What services? Continue working as you have been, he said smoothly, but exclusively for me. My homes, my offices, no one else. It sounded reasonable on the surface, but instinct told me there was more to it. Why? Why go to all this trouble for a housekeeper you met yesterday? Alessio was quiet for a long moment, his dark eyes studying my face with unsettling intensity. I believe in fate, Eleanor. Do you? The question caught me off guard. I don't know. Maybe. When I was 10 years old, watching my father die, a fortune teller in our village told my mother I would find my destiny in the most unexpected place. A ghost of a smile touched his lips. I never believed her, until yesterday, when I walked into my bedroom and found you bleeding on my floor. A chill ran down my spine, despite the warmth of the room. What are you saying? I'm saying that I recognize what belongs to me when I see it. His hand moved to my cheek, cupping it with surprising gentleness. And I protect what's mine. The words should have frightened me. Instead, they awakened something primal and forgotten. A longing to be claimed, to be valued, to belong somewhere, to someone. I'm carrying another man's child, I reminded him, my voice barely above a whisper. His eyes, those depthless dark pools, held mine. For now, that's a technicality. The implication in those words stole my breath. Before I could respond, a wave of nausea rolled through me, sending me stumbling to the bathroom just in time. As I retched miserably into the toilet, I felt strong hands gathering my hair back from my face, a solid presence kneeling beside me on the cold tile floor. I have you. Alessio murmured, his voice a quiet anchor in the storm of my body's rebellion. I have you now. And God help me, despite everything. The impossibility of my pregnancy, the strangeness of his interest, the danger that clung to him like a second skin. I believed him. True to his word, within 3 days I was moved into a sleek apartment in a building that screamed wealth and security. The doorman greeted me by name, and the elevator required a key card to access my floor. The apartment itself was 3 times the size of my previous place, with floor-to-ceiling windows, elegant furnishings, and a kitchen that would make a professional chef weep with joy. I felt like an imposter as I wandered through rooms that contained more luxury than I'd experienced in my entire life. My few belongings, stuffed into 3 suitcases and a handful of boxes, looked pathetically out of place against the backdrop of sophisticated minimalism. "Is it acceptable?" Alessio asked, watching me from the doorway of the master bedroom where I stood frozen, staring at a bed that could comfortably sleep 4. "It's overwhelming," I admitted, turning to face him. "I don't belong here." He crossed the room with that fluid grace that still made my heart beat faster, stopping just inches from me. "You belong where I put you," he said, his voice soft, but leaving no room for argument. A week ago, such a statement would have ignited my indignation. Now, it sent a confusing mix of emotions through me, rebellion tangling with a strange sense of security. "And where is that, exactly?" I asked, holding his gaze despite the intensity I found there. "What am I to you, Alessio?" "Mine," he said simply. "In whatever capacity develops naturally between us." The ambiguity of his answer should have frustrated me, but there was something refreshingly honest about it. He wasn't promising love or even affection, just possession and protection. After years of Mark's pretty lies and eventual betrayal, Alessio's straightforward claim was strangely comforting. "And if nothing develops?" I challenged, needing to establish at least some boundaries. "If I'm just your pregnant housekeeper living in your luxury apartment," something like amusement flickered in his dark eyes, "then you'll be my pregnant housekeeper living in my luxury apartment with excellent health care, proper nutrition, and security. And what do you get out of this arrangement?" His gaze dropped to my lips for the briefest moment before returning to my eyes. "The satisfaction of knowing you're safe." There was more to it. I could sense it in the tension between us, in the way his proximity made my skin prickle with awareness. But I didn't press. The truth was, I needed what he offered too desperately to risk questioning his motives too closely. "I want to keep working," I said instead. "Not just for you, at the hotel." His expression hardened. "Out of the question. I need some independence, Alessio. Some part of my life that isn't controlled by you." "The hotel isn't safe enough," he countered. "Not in your condition." "Then find me something else," I insisted. "Something that gives me purpose beyond waiting in this gilded cage for you to visit." He studied me for a long moment, as if reassessing his approach. "I have an office downtown. The staff there could use additional support. Filing, organization, light cleaning. Nothing strenuous. It wasn't ideal, but it was something. I'll take it. 3 days a week, 6 hours maximum," he added. "And Antonio drives you." I wanted to argue, but recognized the concession for what it was. "Thank you." He nodded once, then checked his watch. A sleek, understated timepiece that probably cost more than a year's rent at my old apartment. "I have a meeting. Make yourself comfortable. There's food in the kitchen, clothes in the closet. Anything else you need? Tell Antonio." "Clothes?" I echoed, glancing toward the walk-in closet. "Your size, nothing flashy. Consider it part of the arrangement." Before I could respond, he leaned forward and pressed his lips to my forehead, a gesture so unexpected it left me speechless. Then he was gone, leaving only the lingering scent of his cologne and the phantom warmth of his lips on my skin. I spent the rest of the day exploring my new home and trying to process the surreal turn my life had taken. The closet was indeed filled with clothes in my size, simple, elegant pieces in neutral colors that somehow looked both expensive and understated. The refrigerator contained fresh produce, lean proteins, and prepared meals labeled with reheating instructions. The bathroom cabinet held prenatal vitamins and gentle toiletries suitable for a pregnant woman. The attention to detail was both touching and unsettling. How had he arranged all this so quickly? What kind of man had the resources and inclination to orchestrate such a comprehensive takeover of a stranger's life? Not a stranger, I reminded myself. He'd called me his destiny, claimed me as his own. The memory of his words sent a shiver down my spine that wasn't entirely unpleasant. That night, I slept in the massive bed alone, wrapped in sheets that felt like liquid silk against my skin. Despite the luxury surrounding me, I dreamed of cold eyes watching from shadows, of golden cages with unlocked doors, of a child with Mark's smile and Alessio's dark, knowing gaze. The following weeks settled into a strange new rhythm. 3 days a week, Antonio drove me to Alessio's downtown office, a sleek glass tower with his name on it, where I organized files, managed correspondence, and generally made myself useful to the efficient, impeccably dressed staff who treated me with a deference that made me uncomfortable. No one asked who I was or why I was there. They simply accepted my presence as if it had been ordained from above, which in a way it had. Alessio himself was rarely there, his business apparently taking him to various locations throughout the city and beyond. But he appeared at my apartment several evenings a week, sometimes for dinner, sometimes just for a brief check-in that felt oddly like a wellness visit. He never touched me beyond the occasional brush of his hand against mine or a chaste kiss on my forehead when he departed. Yet there was always an undercurrent of something more between us, a tension that thickened the air and made my pulse quicken whenever he was near. We talked during these visits about books, films, his business ventures, always described in carefully vague terms. My childhood in a small town, my failed marriage. He listened with genuine interest as I gradually revealed more of myself, and occasionally offered glimpses into his own life. I learned that his father had been a businessman in Sicily, that his mother had fought to give him and his younger sister a normal life in America after their father's murder, that he'd built his empire from nothing through determination and what he called strategic relationships. What he didn't say, about the gun under his pillow, the way people deferred to him with fear thinly veiled as respect, the mysterious meetings that sometimes took him away for days at a time, told me more than his words ever could. As my pregnancy progressed, Alessio insisted on accompanying me to doctor's appointments, sitting silently in the corner while the obstetrician, the best in the city naturally, confirmed that everything was developing normally. The first time we heard the baby's heartbeat, I looked over to find him watching me with an expression I couldn't decipher, something between wonder and fierce possession. "Why are you doing all this?" I asked him later that night, as we sat on the balcony of my apartment, the city lights spread below us like fallen stars. He didn't pretend to misunderstand. "Because no one did it for my mother," he said, after a long silence. "When my father was killed, she was pregnant with my sister. No one helped her. No one protected her. She had to make compromises to ensure our survival." The bitterness in his voice revealed an old wound, still raw despite the years. I reached across the space between us and took his hand, surprising both of us with the gesture. "I'm sorry," I said softly. His fingers tightened around mine. "Don't be. It made me who I am." "And who is that, exactly?" I dared to ask, emboldened by the darkness and the strange intimacy that had developed between us. His smile was a flash of white in the shadows, someone who doesn't need to make compromises anymore. It wasn't a real answer, but I was learning that with Alessio, half-truths and meaningful silences were as close to transparency as he came. At 16 weeks, my pregnancy became impossible to hide. My slender frame now sported a distinct bump, and the morning sickness had finally subsided, replaced by a ravenous appetite and surprising bursts of energy. One morning, as I was organizing files in Alessio's downtown office, I overheard two women whispering near the break room. "She's definitely pregnant," one said, her voice hushed but carrying. "Do you think it's his?" "Has to be," the other replied. "Why else would he set her up like this? You know how protective he is of his family. Still, it's strange. She's so ordinary." I froze, the file in my hand suddenly heavy. Was that how people saw me? As Alessio Moretti's pregnant mistress? The thought was both mortifying and oddly thrilling. "What does it matter if she's ordinary?" A third voice interjected. Male, authoritative. "She belongs to the boss. That's all any of us needs to know." I didn't wait to hear more. slipping away before they could realize I'd overheard. But the conversation followed me through the day, echoing in my mind as Antonio drove me back to the apartment. Alessio was waiting when I arrived, an unusual occurrence for mid-afternoon. He stood by the windows, phone pressed to his ear, his expression thunderous. When he saw me, he ended the call abruptly. "You heard the gossip," he stated, studying my face. I blinked in surprise. "How did you know?" "I know everything that happens in my businesses, Eleanor." He moved toward me, stopping closer than usual, invading my personal space in a way that made my breath catch. "Does it bother you? What they think?" "I don't know what to think myself," I admitted. "What am I to you, Alessio? Really?" Instead of answering, he reached out and placed his hand on my rounded belly. The first time he'd touched me there, the warmth of his palm seeped through my dress, and the baby chose that moment to flutter inside me. Not a kick yet, but a definite movement, as if responding to his touch. "Did you feel that?" I whispered, placing my hand over his. He nodded, his dark eyes intent on my face. "Mine," he said softly, and I wasn't sure if he meant me, the baby, or both of us. Before I could ask, his phone rang again. He answered with a curt, "What?" followed by a string of Italian that sounded like barely controlled fury. When he hung up, his expression had hardened into something dangerous. "I have to go," he said, already moving toward the door. "Stay in the apartment. Do not leave for any reason. Antonio will be outside." "Alessio, what's happening?" He paused, turning back to me. "Business. Nothing for you to worry about." "It sounds like something I should definitely worry about." A ghost of a smile touched his lips. "This is why you fascinate me, Eleanor. Most people would know better than to question me when I look like this." "I'm not most people," I replied, lifting my chin. "And you're scaring me." In 3 long strides, he was before me again, his hands cupping my face with surprising gentleness. "Never be afraid of me," he said, his voice low and intense. "Whatever happens, whatever you hear, remember that everything I do is to protect what's mine." Then he kissed me. Not on the forehead this time, but full on the mouth, a searing contact that stole my breath and scrambled my thoughts. It was over almost before I could respond, leaving me dazed and clutching the back of a chair for support. "Stay inside," he repeated, and then he was gone. I spent the evening in a state of agitated confusion, alternating between pacing the apartment, watching the news for any hint of what might have triggered Alessio's response, and replaying that kiss in my mind. By midnight, there was still no word from him, and exhaustion finally drove me to bed. I woke to the sound of the shower running in the master bathroom. Disoriented, I reached for my phone. 3:17 a.m. Heart pounding, I slipped out of bed and moved cautiously toward the bathroom door, which stood slightly ajar, releasing steam into the bedroom. "Alessio?" I called softly. The shower shut off abruptly. After a moment, the door opened wider to reveal Alessio with a towel wrapped around his waist, water still beating on his chest and shoulders. In the harsh bathroom light, I could see bruises forming along his ribs and a cut above his eyebrow. "You should be sleeping," he said, his voice rough with exhaustion. "What happened to you?" I asked, taking an involuntary step closer. He shook his head. "Nothing important. You're hurt." "I've had worse." I reached up to touch the cut on his face, but he caught my wrist before I could make contact. For a moment, we stood frozen in that position, his fingers circling my wrist, my hand suspended between us, our eyes locked in silent communication. Then something shifted in his expression, a softening around the edges that made him look suddenly younger, more vulnerable. He released my wrist, but caught my hand as it fell, guiding it to rest over his heart. Beneath my palm, I could feel the steady, strong beat, slightly elevated but unwavering. "I'm fine," he said, more gently this time. "Go back to bed." Instead, I stepped closer, eliminating the remaining space between us. His skin was warm and damp from the shower, and I could smell the clean scent of soap mingled with something metallic that I tried not to identify. "Come with me," I whispered, surprising myself with the invitation. His eyes darkened, but he didn't move. "Eleanor, just to sleep," I clarified, feeling heat rise in my cheeks. You're exhausted. I'm exhausted. Let's just rest. Together. After a long moment, he nodded once. I returned to bed, while he finished drying off and pulled on a pair of sweatpants. When he slid beneath the covers beside me, his body radiated heat like a furnace. I turned onto my side, my back to him, unsure what to do next. The question was answered when he moved closer, his chest pressed against my back, one arm draping carefully over my waist, his hand coming to rest protectively over my growing belly. I tensed momentarily, then relaxed into his embrace, a sense of rightness washing over me despite all the unanswered questions between us. Sleep, he murmured against my hair, and for once, I did as I was told without argument. I woke alone, sunlight streaming through the windows I'd forgotten to close the night before. For a moment I wondered if I'd dreamed Alessio's return, but the indentation in the pillow beside me and the lingering scent of his skin on the sheets confirmed his presence had been real. As I stretched, my hand brushed against something on the nightstand, a small velvet box with a note propped against it. The handwriting was now familiar, bold and masculine. For when you're ready. Inside the box was a ring, not a gaudy diamond, but a simple platinum band with a row of small emeralds that caught the light with quiet elegance. My breath caught in my throat as I lifted it from its velvet nest, turning it to read the inscription inside: protected, cherished, mine. The implications sent my heart racing. Was this a proposal? A promise? Another form of protection like the first ring he'd given me? Before I could process what it meant, my phone chimed with a text message. Unknown number, but the content made the sender clear. Wear it or don't. The choice is yours. But know that my intentions remain the same either way. As if on cue, the baby moved inside me, a definite kick this time that made me gasp. One hand went automatically to my belly, while the other still held the ring, caught between two realities. The child that connected me forever to my past, and the man who seemed determined to claim my future. The choice is yours, he'd said. But was it really? Had anything been truly my choice since the moment Alessio Moretti walked into his hotel suite and found me bleeding on his floor? And more troublingly, did I even want the freedom to choose anymore? You need to tell the father, Dr. Collins said at my 20-week appointment, her kind eyes watching me over her glasses. Genetic history is important, and he has legal rights. Beside me, Alessio tensed almost imperceptibly, but his expression remained neutral as he flipped through emails on his phone. We'd maintained the fiction that he was simply a supportive friend accompanying me to appointments, though I suspected Dr. Collins had drawn her own conclusions. It's complicated, I hedged, watching the ultrasound screen where my baby, a boy we'd just learned, shifted and stretched in his protected world. Life usually is, she replied with a gentle smile. But these conversations get harder, not easier, the longer you wait. She was right, of course. Mark deserved to know he had a son on the way, regardless of our history. The question was, what would he do with that information? Demand custody? Try to worm his way back into my life? Reject us both? And what would Alessio do in response? The thought sent a chill through me, despite the growing intimacy between us, sharing a bed most nights now, though still chastely, quiet dinners and long conversations. His unwavering support and subtle displays of affection, there remained an aura of contained violence around him, a sense that his control could slip with devastating consequences. I'd been wearing his ring for 3 weeks, not on my left hand but on my right, a compromise that seemed to satisfy him without committing me fully to whatever he was offering. The staff at his office had noticed immediately, their whispers taking on a new tenor. Respectful, almost reverent, as if the ring had elevated me from curiosity to confirmed status symbol. I'll think about it, I promised Dr. Collins, though my mind was already spinning with possibilities and risks. Later, in the car, Alessio broke his usual post-appointment silence. You don't have to tell him. I turned to look at him, surprised by the direct acknowledgement of the elephant in the room. Legally, I can make it very difficult for him to assert any rights, Alessio interrupted, his tone matter-of-fact. If that's what you want. The casual display of power should have frightened me. Instead, it offered a tempting security, The knowledge that with a word from me, Alessio would ensure Mark remained permanently removed from our lives. Our lives. When had I started thinking of Alessio as a fixed part of my future? I don't know what I want, I admitted, resting my hand on my growing belly, except that I want my son to be safe and loved. Alessio's hand covered mine, warm and solid. That, I can promise you. There was something in his voice, a certainty, a depth of feeling, that made me look at him more closely. Why, Alessio? Why us? You could have any woman, build a family from scratch. Why take on someone else's child? His expression shifted, something ancient and pained flickering behind his eyes. Because I know what it's like to grow up with a father's legacy hanging over you, never quite belonging to the man who claims you. His fingers tightened over mine, and because I've never wanted anything, or anyone, the way I want you. The raw honesty in his voice stole my breath. Before I could respond, he leaned closer, his free hand coming up to cup my cheek. Let me give him my name, he said softly. Let me protect you both in ways no one protected my mother and sister. Let me make you mine in every way that matters. It was the closest thing to a declaration of love I'd heard from him, though the word itself remained unspoken. My heart pounded against my ribs as I searched his face, looking for deception or ulterior motives and finding only intense sincerity. What about Mark? I whispered, the name falling between us like a barrier. Alessio's expression hardened. What about him? He's the biological father. He has rights. Rights he forfeited when he abandoned you. Alessio countered, his voice taking on an edge. Rights that mean nothing against my will. The possessive statement should have alarmed me, but there was comfort in his certainty, in knowing that whatever happened, Alessio Moretti would stand between us and harm, even as a voice in the back of my mind whispered warnings about the nature of his business. The violence that seemed to cling to him like a second skin. I found myself leaning into his touch. I need time, I said finally, to think, to be sure. He nodded once, accepting my hesitation without offense. Time you have, but remember, Eleanor. His dark eyes held mine with hypnotic intensity. I've claimed you as mine, both of you. That doesn't change, regardless of what name you carry or what ring you wear. As the car pulled up to the apartment building, I felt the baby kick again, stronger this time, as if affirming Alessio's claim. My hand tightened reflexively over his, and I saw something like triumph flash in his eyes. He knew as well as I did that my resistance was weakening, that each day bound me more tightly to him with invisible threads of gratitude, dependency, and something deeper that neither of us had named. The only question was whether I would surrender willingly to the golden cage he'd built around us, or continue to pretend I still had the power, or desire, to fly away. The decision was made for me on a rainy Tuesday afternoon. I was leaving Alessio's downtown office, Antonio holding an umbrella over me, as we walked to the waiting car. The street was crowded with people hurrying through the downpour, anonymous figures hunched beneath umbrellas and raincoats. Eleanor? The voice froze me mid-step. I knew it instantly, though I hadn't heard it in months. Slowly, I turned to face the man I'd once pledged my life to. Mark looked exactly as I remembered, handsome in that conventional way that had once seemed so appealing, his blue eyes wide with shock as they took in my obviously pregnant form. My God, he breathed, stepping closer. You're pregnant. Behind me, I felt Antonio tense, moving slightly forward as if to place himself between us. I put a hand on his arm, silently signaling that it was okay. Yes, I said simply, instinctively resting my other hand on my rounded belly. Mark's gaze followed the movement, his expression a complicated mix of emotions I couldn't fully decipher. How? When? It's yours, I said quietly, answering the question he couldn't quite formulate. About 22 weeks now. The color drained from his face. Mine? But you couldn't... You were... Apparently not as barren as you thought, I replied, a hint of bitterness creeping into my tone despite my best efforts. He stepped closer, oblivious to the rain now soaking through his expensive suit. Why didn't you tell me? I had a right to know. The same right you exercised when you left me for a woman who could give you children. The words were sharper than I intended. Years of hurt crystallizing into unexpected strength. I only found out myself a few months ago. His eyes narrowed, finally taking in Antonio's protective stance, the elegant maternity clothes I wore, the emerald ring glinting on my right hand. Who's paying for all this? You couldn't afford this on a housekeeper's salary. The dismissive way he said, housekeeper, made something harden inside me. 5 years of marriage, and he still saw my work as something beneath him, beneath the future he'd envisioned. My fiancé, I said, the lie, or was it, slipping out with surprising ease. Mark's expression darkened. Fiancé? You're engaged? To whom? As if summoned by the question, a sleek black car pulled up beside us. The back door opened, and Alessio emerged, his tall figure commanding immediate attention despite the mundane activity of stepping onto a rainy sidewalk. His dark eyes assessed the situation in an instant, noting my tense posture, Mark's aggressive stance, Antonio's alertness. Without hesitation, he moved to my side, one arm sliding possessively around my waist. Is there a problem, Cara? He asked, his attention focused entirely on me even as I felt the dangerous energy emanating from him. No problem, I replied, leaning into his strength. Just an unexpected reunion. Alessio, this is Mark Wells, my ex-husband. Mark, this is Alessio Moretti, my fiancé. The name registered immediately on Mark's face. Recognition followed quickly by fear. Whatever Alessio's reputation was in the business world, it clearly extended further than I'd realized. Moretti, Mark repeated, taking an involuntary step back. I didn't realize that Eleanor had moved on, Alessio finished smoothly, his accent more pronounced than usual. With someone who recognizes her true value? The underlying threat in his words wasn't subtle. Mark swallowed visibly, his eyes darting between us. The baby is mine, he said, an attempt at assertiveness that fell flat against Alessio's commanding presence. Biologically, perhaps, Alessio conceded, his thumb stroking a small circle against my hip. But in every way that matters, this child will be a Moretti. The certainty in his voice sent a shiver through me that had nothing to do with the rain. This wasn't just posturing for Mark's benefit. It was a declaration of intent, a promise being made in this unlikely public forum. Mark's face flushed with anger and something else. Perhaps the realization that he'd discarded something precious only to see it claimed by a man whose very name made him pale with fear. I have rights, he insisted, though his voice wavered. That's my son or daughter. Son, I corrected quietly. And yes, legally you have rights. But ask yourself this, Mark. Where were you when I needed you? When I was told I couldn't have children and you walked away? When I built a new life from the ashes of the one you destroyed? Each question landed like a physical blow. I felt Alessio's approval in the slight tightening of his arm around me. I made a mistake, Mark said, desperation creeping into his tone. I can admit that now. We could try again for our son's sake. A laugh escaped me, genuine if tinged with disbelief. There is no we anymore, Mark. There's me and my son and the man who stepped up to protect us both when you were nowhere to be found. A man you've known for what, a few months? Mark countered. You don't know anything about him, about his business, his background. I know enough, I replied, echoing Alessio's words from what seemed like a lifetime ago. I know he claimed us when you rejected us. I know he sees my value beyond my ability to bear children. I know he would never abandon his family. The last statement was a gamble, an assumption based on what I'd gleaned about Alessio's fierce protection of his mother and sister. The subtle nod I felt against my hair confirmed I'd guessed correctly. This isn't over, Mark warned, but the defeat in his eyes belied his words. I'll be in touch. No, you won't, Alessio said, his voice deceptively soft. Not unless invited. Eleanor and my son deserve peace, not complications from the past. The menace underlying his polite words was unmistakable. Mark paled, nodded once, and retreated into the rain-soaked crowd. As we watched him disappear, Alessio turned me gently to face him, his dark eyes searching mine. Fiancé? I felt heat rise in my cheeks. It seemed simpler than explaining, whatever this is between us. And what is this between us, Eleanor? He asked, his voice low and intense. Tell me what you want it to be. Rain fell around us, soaking through my clothes despite Antonio's valiant efforts with the umbrella. But I barely noticed, caught in the gravity of the moment, of the choice before me. "I want to be yours," I whispered, finally admitting what I'd known for weeks. "I want my son to be yours. I want the protection and the certainty and everything else you've been offering." His expression softened, a rare smile transforming his severe features. Without a word, he reached for my right hand, slipping the emerald ring from my finger, only to place it firmly on my left hand instead. "Now it's official," he said simply. "Now everyone will know." As his lips met mine in a kiss that promised both possession and devotion, I felt my son kick strongly between us, a third heartbeat binding us together in this strange, unexpected family forged from loss and found in the most unlikely of places. In the arms of a dangerous man, I had finally found safety. In the eyes of a hardened criminal, I had found recognition of my worth. And in the shadows of a life I never expected to lead, I had found the light of belonging that had eluded me for so long. "Take me home," I whispered against his lips when we finally parted. "As you wish, Mrs. Moretti," he replied. And for the first time, the name felt right, a destiny fulfilled rather than a cage accepted. Thank you all so much for following this story. If you're enjoying it, don't forget to like and subscribe, because your support is important for me to continue here.